Hello, I'm Amanda Hocking, and I'm here for another episode of What If on Wednesdays, where I take a look back at some of my books and different things, and I say, what if things had been different than the way they went? Last week, I talked about What If Watersong were a TV show, and in the first episode, I talked about what if the Trill series Wendy had made a different choice. So this week, I am taking a look at one of the other questions that I get a lot from readers, and that is, in the My Blood Approved series, what if Wendy's bond had been different? So it should be obvious given, the kind of nature of this, but I'm going to be talking about a lot of spoilers about the My Blood Approved series. If you have not read all 5 books in the My Blood Approved series, My Blood Approves, Fate, Flutter, Wisdom, Swear. If you have not read those books, do not watch this video or you will be spoiled, absolutely. Also, if you haven't read the Letters to Elise, you'll be spoiled for that a little bit, but it's not going to be too bad, and you already kind of are spoiled for that in Swear anyway, so, yeah. So when you first start reading My Blood Approves, the connection between Alice and Jack and Peter doesn't exactly make sense. It's kind of confusing a little bit. But as the story goes on, I do eventually explain it. And so I'm going to go and now I'm going to explain it from straightforward what is canonically happened so we can dissect it and look at how it would be different if it had been different. So in the vampire world that I've created in the My Blood Approved series, everyone kind of has like a soulmate that they'll eventually just meet and instantly connect and bond with. The main mated pair that you see in the series that's together is May and Ezra, but even as the series shows, just because they're mated does not mean they always agree and doesn't mean that it's problem-free. I mean, there are times that, mated pairs can actually, split and things like that. So it's not like a completely unbreakable bond, but it is like a very intense bond. I don't go too much into the science of it because I am not a scientist, but the basic idea of it is there's something in their blood that they can sense and that connects them and they make a good pair together. And I think that the idea of it is that because they can't really procreate very much, it's more about having connections to keep them grounded, and so they needed to have this kind of bond, or maybe it's something that is just more an extreme version of human soulmates. I don't know. I mean, I know I should know because I wrote it, but I don't know exactly because then it goes too far back to where everything comes from. I don't know where anything originally comes from. This is just where we are now in the world with the knowledge that we have. So what happened in the My Blood Approved series is Alice meets Jack and Peter, and she feels a connection to them both, and it's confusing because it doesn't feel like it really belongs exactly with either of them. And then Ezra is also fond of her, so he knows for sure that he's one of his brother's mates, but she doesn't know which one. So the story goes is way back in the early 90s, when Jack was turned into a vampire by May and Peter. So what happened is May didn't usually feed on humans. She bit Jack, and she fed too much, and he died. He was dead for a few minutes. Peter tried, once his heart had stopped beating, Peter was like, and May's freaking out. He was like, okay, I don't want her to kill this human. The only way that I know how to save him when he's lost this much blood is to turn him into a vampire. And so that's what Peter does. But because Jack died for a minute, it messed up the soul bonds and the way he's connected like that. Changed everything because he was dead, and so that's why he's kind of a different kind of vampire. I mean, he's not exactly a different kind, but I think that he's maintained his humanity a bit more than some of the others, and it's not just because he's younger, it's because he was dead, so he's got he's a little different in those kind of ways. I also think that's why he has his connection with Alice is so intense, but also not, and I think that's part of it is just with him being dead. So years ago, Ezra had a mate named Elise, and they weren't together very long before, I can't remember exactly now, it's been a little while, I think it was about 10 years though, roughly, before she died. And so he's been kind of sad about that forever, because once your mate's gone, and you're immortal, because you're a vampire. So he has a long time left, and he didn't really know what to do at that time. By the time, he'd already had a relationship with Ezra, and he basically kept going for Ezra because Ezra and him really cared about each other, because the bond between Maker and Protege is super, super strong in vampires. That leads us to Alice meeting Jack and Peter. And the reason that everything gets so confused is because Alice her bond is kind of misplaced because Peter made Jack. They had got the closest bond between the brothers, and that's why Peter feels such an attraction to her initially. It's in a very tense attraction. And it's because of his bond with Jack, and it's even I think strengthened by his bond for Jack, because Peter and Jack were actually very, very fond of each other, and that affection is also mudding the bond and making it even like more complicated. But Alice and Jack definitely do have a connection right away. Like he's kind of into her right away, and then she's into him too because he's a vampire. But there's also something else there. They're drawn to each other, and so it's there in the beginning, but it doesn't feel so romantic. It just feels more like, hey, like there's like a click between them. I deliberately wrote it that way because I wanted her to actually fall in love with him. I wanted it not to be fate. I wanted it to be, I love him because I love him, not because, anything in my blood made me love him. And so she falls in love with him, and he falls in love with her, and they do really come to love each other. And then the bond, I think, gets strengthened and stuff more as as time goes on and as she becomes a vampire and things like that. But it's still, they actually love each other, and they would have separate from any kind of chemical reaction. But a lot of people were, fans of Peter and wanted to know what it would look like if the bond had been differently. What if her bond had been for Peter? And I obviously, I've thought about that from time to time. I think one of the main reasons I was so reluctant to have even consider them, I had the idea in my head, and I always did, like, that she was going to be with Jack from, like, book one. That always was the idea, and so that would have, is what I'd always planned to do. And because I don't always like the idea of soulmates. Sometimes I do, and sometimes I don't. But sometimes I think it takes away some of the excitement and the choice and the autonomy. But then other times I think it's fun and I don't know. So I go back and forth between what mood I was in. This one, when I was writing My Blood Approves, I was in a mood where I wanted it to be very kind of like anti-fate and anti-destiny, even though it's still very woven with destiny. But yeah, so if it had been, if she had chosen Peter, I think the books would have been actually a lot less complicated in some ways, because part of it was really Jack and Peter kind of like figuring out the dynamics between them and in the family and things like that. And so that was part of the stuff, especially in the earlier books. But because I think that Jack would have backed off more right away if he hadn't. I don't know, except he still did. Because then it's because if you have like the basic. If you assume that the bond wasn't blended at all, if it was just like for one of them completely, I don't think that the triangle actually would have happened at all. I think that both brothers would have backed off. It was the fact that they both kind of felt this like claim to her in a way. I don't like that word, but they felt like and so that's why they kept warring, because otherwise I don't think they would have. So if the bond had been clean for one or the other, there wouldn't have been warring, and I think they would have just been, she either would have been good friends with Jack or good friends with Peter, and it wouldn't have been so complicated. I do think eventually that, because of the way it's also set up, I do think eventually, like if whoever she was bonded with, the other brother would have had feelings for her, but he would have just basically just like shoved them down and ignored it, because it's his brother's maid, he's not gonna get in there and stuff like that, because they really would have respected that relationship. And it would have been a little bit more complicated than a typical, family dynamics, I suppose, but I think it would have been, they would have been happy and it would have worked. And one of the main reasons that I ultimately didn't really toy around with her being like with Peter too much is because I do think that he was incredibly abusive in the first book, and I kind of like had some regret about how aggressively abusive he is. I wanted him to be cruel and push her away, but I also think it's too easy to romanticize violence in relationships and things like that, and I really don't want it to be like, like a Harley Quinn Joker kind of relationship dynamic, which I kind of was more like there in the beginning. I don't know. It was just so I didn't, and a lot of in the rest of the books though. I think I make a more conscious effort to kind of walk back some of that stuff and say that he was never really doing that, and kind of actually I don't know if it's the right thing, but I think because I can't have him as a romantic lead if he's gonna like try and kill teenage girls because they don't want to go on a date with him. You know what I mean? Like, that's not what... I'm not saying that it isn't fun to read about in certain books, but especially for a young adult book, that's not something that I want. But I mean, that is something that I got more cognizant of stuff as I was writing about, that I don't want to glorify unhealthy behaviors. And so I think that Peter really does have a lot of growth over the books because he had to. He started out in such a terrible place that he had to do a lot of growing. Jack didn't have to do as much growing, because that was kind of the whole point. I always just really like, like funny funny guys and stuff. And I would say the character that Jack is most inspired by is Fry from Futurama, because that was my point for him. Is he just has a really good heart. That's what Jack brings to the table. Is he's got a really good heart. He's not the smartest of the brothers. He's not the strongest, the oldest. I don't even really think that he's the best looking. He has just got the best heart. And so that was really I think that's really good quality. I mean, I do think that I didn't know the term at the time. I don't think it was even coined, but Jack is a bit of a himbo, for sure. But I like that, I like that, and I like how the dynamic changes as they grow. And she becomes a vampire. She is more taking care of him and protecting him. She's stronger than he is, and I really liked that the switch of the dynamic that her and Jack would have. That I didn't really feel like her and Peter necessarily could have. I think she's a bit stronger than Peter, but he's also so much older and wiser, and he's got all these other things going for him that it's not exactly that way. I mean, I do think like they could have been happy, like everyone could be happy. I don't know. It totally changes. Like, what does it mean for Jack? And does he have? I mean, if she's mated for him, then Jack would obviously have another mate that he could eventually be with. I wrote the ending the way that I did for Swear because I did really want to give Peter a happy ending, and I thought it was the best way to do it. I know that it was heartbreaking for a lot of people, but I did confirm that in this world, there's an afterworld, and that he's going to be with Elise, and that's all he's ever wanted. So I didn't feel like it was an unhappy one. It was the only way that I could really reunite them in a way that I don't know, that seemed within the bounds of the world, I guess. I don't know. If you hear a meow in the background, it's my cat Speak. She wants to be in the office. I'm just in 1 or 2 right now. Yeah, I guess, I mean, if Alice but see, I don't really know how I could explain if Alice and Elise, and I swear, and their names are so super similar, you would think, like, oh, you did that on purpose to be quite, I really didn't. I actually named Elise after Letters to Elise by The Cure, and I named Alice after Alice in Wonderland, and I did not even realize how similar they were, and now it seems like I was doing more foreshadowing, like, between them than I actually meant to. I know there are people who thought that, like, she was a reincarnated Elise or something. She's not. That was never my intention. I was just a big, silly goofball with the names, and I think I kind of accidentally misdirected people in some way, but that was not my intention. It happens sometimes, when you're writing something, sometimes you make things and you think you're doing like a ton of careful foreshadowing, and then sometimes you accidentally just put something in there and readers just grab it, and you're like, oh, that was just like a throwaway line, but now, okay, so it happens, and and then what the crazy part is, then sometimes readers also miss, like, the really carefully, like, laid stuff. You're like, people are gonna be super excited when I laid all these pieces, and they see it, and they're like, nah, I don't even care about that, but I'm hooked on this one line that you thought didn't mean anything. It's kind of, how things go. Ultimately, I do like the pairings, the way they are in the book. I mean, obviously, I wrote it that way. It would be a different book, but I think that obviously if things were switched around and Jack had a mate and Peter and Alice could be together, that would be, that would work. And I think there would have been a lot more mutual respect between the brothers if the bond hadn't been so wonky, which is why I made the bond wonky. I wanted there to be the drama of not just feeling like, oh, nice to meet you, and then just politely walking away. I think that's not as interesting of a book. I did make a deliberate choice when I was like, because I had read so many books, and there were, especially like when I was writing this, there were so many books about vampires and things like that at the time, and that's not a complaint, because I liked like so many of those books, and a lot of them were very good, but I saw a lot, they were always just like picking the brooding one, let's go pick the brooding one, and I always wanted the funny guy, and so it was a deliberate like, that's what the funny guy went, and I've talked about that too. If you see, I'm always going to pick the funny guy. If there's a choice between the brooder and the funny one, I'm always going to pick the funny one. So that'll be what you can know going into it, that's kind of my MO. I think the path that, everyone took was very complicated and painful at times, but I think that everyone had a lot of growth and a lot of realizations going through it. And I do think that in the end of Swear, everyone does have a happily ever after. I gave them the best one that I could give them, and yeah, so I think it works out okay. It just seems complicated and painful, but I do think that Jack and Alice are a good pairing, and I think that her and Peter did have a special friendship, and I think that she helped him get to a point and get to peace that he wouldn't have been able to get to otherwise. So it's still was a good thing. I mean, and Swear really dives through that a lot more and stuff, so. Yeah, so those are my thoughts on how I think things would be different if Alice's bond was different. And I think, this is again one of those things where it would be very difficult. I like Peter a lot. Like, I love Peter, I really do. But it would be very difficult for me to write a book from his POV just because of the way things are. And it's very much where I feel like fan fiction is a good way to fill in the gap. Because if you see this story and you feel the story, I think it will be better than me trying to force something that I actually don't feel. But I see this stuff there. I see what you like about him because I like him too. It's just not the story that I had in my head. Next week I will be back with another What If Wednesdays video, and I think it's going to be super fun. If you have ideas or different things you'd like to see me talk about, please do leave comments. I am definitely taking them into consideration, because I love to hear what you guys think and what you guys like. Also, next week, on June 24th, the second book in the Seven Fallen Hearts saga will be out. It is available for pre-order in ebook now, but it will be out in ebook and paperback. And it's very good and very exciting, and if you like fairy tale romance, I think that you'll enjoy this. On June 30th, I'm going to be doing my next book club, where I'm going to be talking about Neon Gods by Katie Roberts. And the thing about Neon Gods is, I actually got it mixed up with another book. I still want to read this book. It is on my TBR, but this one is a little bit more mature. If you don't like that kind of thing, don't read it. Sorry, but I already said this was the book, so I'd got it mixed up, because I've been planning to keep this more of a PG-13 book club. This is a little bit more R, I think. I haven't actually read it yet. I read it closer to when I do the book club. But just something to keep in mind. Check out reviews and see if this is something they're comfortable reading. I'm still excited about it. I think it's a good book. I hope it's going to be a good book, and it sounds fun. So yeah, that's what I'll be reading next to the book club, and I will be and that will be June 30th, when we'll have the next meeting of Mandy's TBR book club. I'm also going to have a couple special videos coming out in the next few weeks, so I think that should check those out. I think that you'll like it. Maybe not, I don't know. If you enjoyed this video or any of my other videos, please make sure that you're hitting like and subscribe. It really helps me out, and really helps to make sure that you're keeping, you're not missing any news about new videos or book covers, especially because I tend to just kind of decide to release stuff on that. So please make sure that you hit like and subscribe. Until next time, stay safe, be kind, and happy reading.